Today, we're honored to have Kurtis Hanni, a seasoned CFO and a leader of knowledge in the fields of financial management and strategic business growth. Kurtis brings a wealth of over 15 years of experience, combining his profound understanding of financial statements with a personal journey that transformed challenges into opportunities for growth. His insights are not only theoretical, they are born out of real-world experiences, making him a sought-after guide in the financial landscape. Besides his role as a CFO and consultant, Kurtis reaches thousands through his frameworks and finance newsletter, where he breaks down complex financial concepts into understandable and actionable advice. So whether you're struggling with decoding your financials or just keen to get a deeper understanding of the financial world, you're in for a treat. Let's dive into the world of finance with Kurtis Hanni. Hey Kurtis, how are you doing today, buddy?
Good. Excited to chat.
Thank you for making the time. I appreciate you coming on. I've been an avid follower of your newsletter. It's helped me with my business. And so I thought I'd had to reach out to you and see if you would give us the opportunity to record. And here we are.
Yeah. No, that's why I write. I enjoy writing because it helps me think about the way I'm processing things. And then I get to have fun conversations like this and hear how everyone is running their businesses. And so for me, that's like the best of both worlds. Excited to dive in.
Great. I'm going to throw it slightly in the deep end for the first question, Kurtis. As a CFO who has delved deeply into the financial workings of businesses, what's one common financial blind spot you often see in companies? And how do you approach into turning things around? Maybe you could share a specific example or experience where addressing this change, where it changed the game for particular businesses.
Yeah. I think from a financial perspective, dealing with financial statements, understanding your financials, it's a really intimidating thing. And it's never the first thing for most people that you think about when you start a business, right? When you start a business, you're excited about selling a specific widget. You're excited about serving a particular client, whatever that looks like. And often the financials can be a back burner thing. And so quite frankly, the biggest blind spot that I think a lot of companies have is it's a little bit intimidating when you've ran a business, when you've done all that, to acknowledge or really think about, I don't understand my financials as much as I should. And when you look at the statistics, I don't remember exactly where I found this, but 48% of small business owners self-identified as not understanding their financial statements when asked directly, do you feel like you have a grasp of your financial statements? And so I don't think it's necessarily blind spots as much as it's just like the blind spot of not committing the time to deeply understand their financials. And I think if 48% are self-reporting that, you have to guess there's also a percentage of that 52 that don't understand it well, but just aren't willing to acknowledge that. And so for me, it's just trying to let business owners know there's no shame in saying, I struggle with it. It's being willing to acknowledge that, get rid of the ego, and then get into the weeds of your specific business and saying, how do we get to this point? And I actually just had a conversation, not just probably 2 weeks ago now, with the business owner that I'm working with. And he's been in this business for 2.5 years now. He purchased it. And he was frustrated because he's like, I'm making less now as a business owner than I've made for the previous 10 years of my career. And I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to actually being able to pull money and make money off of this business. And when it came down to it, and this is so often the case, he was struggling with the cash flow aspect of their business. And so I was able to help him, and we were able to model out his cash flow. And from that, we realized that he had two different places he could source his inventory from. In one of them, it had to be shipped from overseas, and it was on the water for 3 to 4 months. Whereas he had another option that he could get the inventory 15 days from ordering it. And we were able to show how improving that cash flow with the 15-day option would significantly change within 3 months the amount of money and amount of cash he had flowing with his business, and how quickly he was able to turn the outlay of cash for that inventory into revenue. And it completely transformed his ability to not only pull money out of the business, but his ability to scale. And so cash flow is definitely a huge one. I'm sure we'll talk about that throughout this conversation. But for me, the blind spot and it's not even really a blind spot. Let's demystify this. Let's get to the nuts and bolts. Be willing to admit when you're struggling with it, because there's no shame in struggling with it, because no one has really taught it on a business level. Even in business, like even when you're in college, like it's just not good enough. And so being willing to admit it is that blind spot. I think that to me is like the big thing, is if we can get over that boogeyman of your willingness to acknowledge that you might need help with it, or that you might need to get some education on it, then your business is going to be better off in the long run, for sure.
Absolutely with you, Curtis. As you were talking about this, I started to think about my own journey. And at the beginning, about almost a decade ago now, when I first started my first cafe, I didn't know anything about the numbers. I pretty much gave it to my business partner and go, you do all the numbers, I focus on the product and I focus on the service. You think about that. And then later on, as things got more difficult, I was like, okay, I think I need to understand the numbers a bit better. And even when we change venues and we change business partners and restructured, and it was my turn to understand the numbers a bit better, like you said, I never really learned it anywhere, because you've learned on the go and you start to map out what you think is the map of the business or the cash flow of the business. And even till today, I'm still learning, like, this is incorrect, or this is more of a correct picture. And I'm still chopping and changing things, and I'm still trying to get a better understanding and a better way to monitor everything. It's a constant learning process for me, and it's something I've had to really admit the hard truth that I actually don't understand it as clearly as I should or think I should.
Yeah. And I've told this story before, but it bears repeating. I went to college for accounting. I got a master's, really focused on accounting. And I was in big companies. I was doing presentations to the board, to the leaders, talking about these different elements of the business that I was a part of, that I was one of the leaders in. And then I get to a small business, and I go in my first meeting with the CEO at the small business, and this is my very first. At that point, I don't know that you could technically call it a CFO gig, but it was very first foray into something that wasn't really big numbers, and it was, we're looking at the financial statement, and the first question out of his mouth is, "Why did gross margin change?" And I had to realize in that moment, I prepared for that meeting, and it hadn't crossed my mind, like, what was the driver of gross margin in this? And so it's like, I had all the head knowledge, but until you really get the experience with it, it's really hard to get the application. And me, with all the background in education, I was left like on an uneven surface, out of balance by that simple, stupid question. And I stumbled my way through that. Oh, there's these things could be. And I ultimately said, let me go and dig into that deeper, and I'll give you some more root causes with this. And then he was good with that, and it's fine. But I had this moment of, I felt like I was an imposter in that moment, because I should have understood this, because I'm supposed to be the expert. But what you realize is, in understanding the financials of the business, it's an iterative process, something that's never done, something that always can use work. I think that also helps too, because people think one day I'm just going to completely get it. But you have to realize that you're always learning. Just like every business, you're always learning. It's the same thing when looking at the financials. Things are going to happen and you're going to realize, oh, we probably should have been monitoring this. And then you can put systems in place to monitor it for the next time. And just understanding and acknowledging that iterative process is big.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that, Curtis. I think it's a core principle that people need to face the truth of financial statements, admitting that they need to understand it on a better level and that it's a constant process. And it's okay that you don't understand it at the moment, but as long as you reach out for help and you continue to learn, then you'll get better understanding what the business is about. Let's move on to some of the core principles that you believe everyone should follow when it comes to managing their finances. What are some of your takes on that?
Yeah, I think it's really easy to complicate it. And so when I think about core principles and I think about the things that are really important for people is when you look at financial statements, you look at the financials of the business, obviously speaking very broadly here, but we want to understand revenue. We want to understand gross profit margins. We want to understand profit and we want to understand cash flow. If you can get those four right and you can understand what is driving each of those four, to me, that is the foundation of every financial statement. That's the foundation of every business. And so at a high level, that's very broad. But for example, look, just talking about revenue, right? And in your situation, in these restaurants, it's asking the question, what is driving our revenue? Well, our revenue is going to be people coming through the doors. It's going to be the ticket amount that they've got when they've got in there. And those are probably the main two drivers of your revenue. Can you think of
Okay.
anything else that you would add to that?
Events,
Yeah.
yeah,
Good
corporate
point.
bookings or online
Yeah.
retail and so on.
So then it's a question of how can I drive more people through the door? And then how can I increase ticket prices? And then if events are another big driver, it's what's the driver there? But like avoiding events for now, once you break that revenue down into the people through the door and the ticket price of each party that comes through, then you can start to do things and make decisions that potentially impact those two variables. And it becomes a lot more simple on how we drive revenue and of how we get more people in the door, how we drive revenue. Is it increasing prices? Is it offering upsells? There's a million ways that we can go about it. But from a fundamental perspective, I think we get too caught up in those weeds. And I think we need to go back to those core principles of ultimately, we're trying to increase cash flow. Ultimately, we're trying to improve profits. And those four variables, if we can just think about business in those four variables, we can get closer to the core principles of finances in general and of the business.
Thank you for sharing that, Curtis. I think those 4 points are very important. And yes, although they're on a broader level, if you do narrow them down, you can really think about it carefully and how each point drives each. And I think it's a really good point to also demonstrate how business owners can get creative around how they can drive revenue. It's instead of going, okay, how do we just drive more revenue as a high level question? It's what is currently driving our revenue? And then how do we maximize that? Because when you have a smaller container, then you can pick out, okay, that item in granular detail is selling the most. Why is it selling the most? Can we make something similar? Can we make more of those and so on? So
yeah. I did a newsletter issue probably a month or two back where I talked about the 5 whys framework. And that honestly is a really good framework for digging into your finances, right? Because I can't give you all of the right questions to ask because every business is going to be unique. But it's taking each one of those variables and going down each level until you get to root issues. And then seeing how, as you address those root issues, your numbers change, and then repeat that process over and again. It's almost an unlimited amount of iterations that you have. You're just limited by the time and the number of experiments you could run at the same time. But it's definitely that 5 whys is really powerful for getting to those root causes in a financial perspective as well.
I love the 5 whys one. I don't think people use it enough. It's when you first read about it, you're like, oh wow, yeah. And you try it once, you're like, this is powerful. And then you don't
Yeah.
touch it for another couple of months or a few years. You're like, oh yeah, that concept, that framework. Let's use that again. And then you use this. Oh, why don't I use this more often? You know?
Yeah, 100%. I actually, that's the experience I had when I started thinking about it, is I realized that's the process that I go through with all of my clients. And so I'm like, let me share this.
Man, you talk a lot about frameworks in your newsletters, obviously, and you've just shared one. I'm curious if you can share another framework that has gotten the most engagement or the most replies. It'd be interesting to hear.
Yeah, I think when you prepped me with this question, and I was like, I started going down different rabbit holes because this is something that I always enjoy digging into. And I think from a financial perspective, I've written about a number of frameworks, but I have that one that I actually thought of just recently. And I think it was from Morgan Housel's new book, Same as Ever. And he talks about the hindsight. I think it was from that. It may have been from something else. Anyways, it doesn't matter. Talk about the hindsight bias. And it's where we convince ourselves after an event that we accurately predicted it before it happened. So it's like if there's, I didn't think of a good example, but if there's a contract that we're trying to get and we go in and we bid on this contract and we convince ourselves that we got this contract because of one reason or got it or didn't get it because of another reason, we can always look back. And if we make bad assumptions looking back, then we're going to act based off of those bad assumptions, and it can impact those future results. And it's why I'm a big fan of doing forecasting, of setting goals, setting plans from a financial perspective, because it can help us when we look back to see what assumptions we made and what we thought might be true and how it was actually different. Because I think as humans, we're very good at convincing ourselves we were right when we look back on stuff, when in reality, we may have been completely off. And I think if we can get better at making decisions or understanding our past decisions, it's going to help us better understand our future decisions. I think a very similar one to that hindsight bias is the sunk cost fallacy, right? They're kind of cousins, right? In that we think about all the stuff that happened in the past and we assign a weight to it. But if we allow that past to impact us in a negative way, then it can completely throw us off in the future. And I think we see that a lot in businesses with the sunk cost fallacy, is that we spent a certain amount of money on a bad solution. We realize it's a bad solution, but we don't want to switch to a new solution, even if the bad one is going to cost us more money because we've already spent the money on the bad one. And I think the hindsight bias plays into that because we say, oh, it's not that bad. And we justify what happened in the past, because when you combine those and work those together, you don't really want to have to acknowledge that you may have made a mistake or had a bad assumption.
And so with something like that, are you trying to negate it with forecasting? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah. So there's a few things. I mentioned forecasting it's putting together a forecast. It's setting goals, setting 1 year, either 3 or 5 year goals, setting goals that are out there, and then putting a plan together for how you're going to achieve those goals, so that anytime that you have a goal, we want to make sure that we have a measurable associated with that. So I always like to use sales leads or sales calls, because everyone understands what a sales call is, right? We could say that we need to make 100 sales calls to make 5 sales. And so we just want to make 5 sales for the year. So we plan out our 100 sales calls. But if we don't identify that we need to make 100 to get 5 before, and then we start making the calls and we realize now we're going to have to make 200. If you think about it from the perspective of, now we made 2 sales and we didn't track or we didn't have a plan for how we were going to go about getting those sales, we can justify that we only made 2 sales because it's a bad offer. We only made 2 sales because, we got focused on those clients, maybe their big ticket thing, whatever it is. We can justify the reason that we got the outcome. Whereas if we realize we only got 2 because we only made 50 calls, we can see we didn't do the volume we needed to do. Or maybe we only got 2 and we did 200 calls. And it can be, so by setting that assumption or setting that goal up front, it helps you make sure that then, did you follow up with that action? And did that action lead to the outcome that I was expecting it to? And if it didn't, you then know that assumption that you made in the past was bad. But if you don't set that goal, you're going to, because of hindsight bias, you're going to convince yourself that your assumptions weren't bad, that it was some factor that you might not have controlled is what was the mistake, right? And so it's easy to convince ourselves that our decisions weren't bad, when in reality, maybe the decision or assumption was bad, but we also didn't act in a way. It's like determining where our assumptions are, where our actions are, and what the outcome is and how each of those differ. And if we can really hone in on that, I think that's why the planning process is so powerful, is because it holds us accountable to what our previous self thought. And I'm big on that because, again, it helps us avoid these sort of situations of bias that we fall into.
I really like this piece. I think it's a very important and key piece to reiterate on. So if you do it and you do set your goal, your specific task, and or the forecast of it, and then really seeing if that assumption was true or not, and then repeating that process again and again, I think is a very powerful process. A lot of people, I don't think, actually close the loop.
Yeah.
Like I said, they might just go, oh, yeah, like I said, maybe the offer wasn't good enough, or I don't know. I don't even know how many people I reached out to. And then they don't close that loop and go, okay, look, I reached out to 50, I got 2. Let's first assume that maybe it's just a numbers game and then go with that. And then maybe later on you might test the assumption and go, no, it wasn't a numbers game. The next time I did it, it was only 1 person out of 200 people. So I guess it wasn't that. Maybe it really is the offer. And then you can go back to the drawing board and go, okay, let's change up the offer and redo this math.
I think you're 100% on. Of the closing the loop is, in some sense, like you have to have the plan to start, but the closing the loop is most important, because if you don't learn from those mistakes that you made, you're just going to continue to make those same mistakes. And I'll acknowledge, even though I know that, it is hard, because it seems I've got better things to do with my time, but by closing the loop, you're improving your decisions down the line. And that's super important. I think where people also get off, they think planning is a one-time thing, right? They think I'm planning for the year, but if your assumption was off, there's nothing that means that you can't change that. You can't change that goal in quarter 3 or quarter 1 of a 4-quarter year. When you realize I've made half of my calls and I'm not getting what I expect, it's like, go back to the drawing board, right? And so that's why measuring your progress as you go and having those goals is key, because it allows you to react quicker when you see that things are off or not aligning with what you expect.
Absolutely. How often does a 3 or 5 year goal turn out to be exactly that? Never.
Yeah. And people get so twisted of thinking that when you set that goal, that's what you're supposed to do. But it's like, no, the goal is actually just setting my direction in that moment. The path is going to be whatever it is, and that I'm going to change that. So yes, it's pretty funny because I'm deep in the social media stuff, and it's like people making all these statements and about how setting those goals is stupid and whatnot. And I'm like, I set a 10-year goal, right? And I don't know if I'm going to want to achieve that even 6 months from now. But that 10-year goal is a snapshot in time of what I was thinking at that moment, of what my and I can view my decisions through that lens. And then when I revisit it and realize that, oh, this is not what I want anymore, you just change it.
Mm.
But I'm going to be better off by viewing my decisions through my aspirational lens than I am if I don't have that at all. And I think very motivated people assume that everyone else is like them and that they're just in push and push even without that. But I think a lot of people need that so that they don't get distracted, because it's very easy to get distracted and get off track.
Yeah. To tie into this as well, there's an exercise that I love to do, and it's pretty much just daydreaming, but if you want to give it a more technical term, you can call it future casting.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's pretty much whenever I want something or I'm like working hard towards something, and I think, you know what, let's just fast forward 10 years down the track. What if I did get that? What if I did conquer that mountain? What if I was at the top of that hill? Is that where I want to be? And a lot of the times that's a lot of effort to get there. And when I got there, maybe it wasn't where I actually wanted to be. So it just brings me back to reality. Then what are you doing working so hard trying to get there when that's not the end goal you want to be at? Yeah, a bit of fun in that process.
Yeah, for sure.
And as you've gone along and helped a lot of businesses and created all these frameworks for these newsletters, how has your approach to personal finance evolved over the years? And what's one habit that has been a game changer for your financial health?
Yeah. I've been very lucky in that I grew up in a family where my parents were very good with money, had very little debt. And so I grew up with a really good financial foundation. And so from the very beginning, I made pretty good financial decisions. But as I've evolved, as the years have went on, realized, and seeing this with business owners especially, is I don't know how familiar you are with like the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early movement, where people are just piling up cash to be able to retire and like live on the beach. And I just think, and we could go so deep into this, so I don't know that we necessarily want to go there, but I think that's hogwash, because I think we as humans are made to want to work. We're made to want to achieve things. And for a long time, I saved up a bunch of money thinking I wanted to get to this FIRE goal and I wanted to do all of these things. And so that meant I was avoiding debt. That meant I was forgoing all of the joy and all of the fun now. And I got to a point where I realized, like, what am I doing this for? I'm creating stress for me and my family today. And we're potentially saying no to trips with friends, to going out to this nice dinner, to going to this football game that may be a once in a lifetime deal, whatever it is, like whatever you want to do, for this idea of future fun. And we don't know what time we have left on this earth. We don't know how long we're going to have. And so for me, I know this is a little bit off of what you were talking about,
No, please do.
but yeah, but I really realized that so many business owners, and I've seen this play out time and time again, is they're always pushing for more, right? They're always trying to grow, always trying to do the next thing. They're always hesitant to pull that money out, to take that money, or to do those things personally. And what I like took from that, and what I've helped and seen this with people, is setting aside and giving yourself that leeway to have fun, to really just create this bucket over here that is pulling money out for you, that you can spend on cost of living, on fun, on whatever you want to spend it on, and then taking the rest and then using it for those same financial gains that you've always used it for. And I've seen that, because so many businesses, so many people, they have everything in one bucket and then they just don't know what they can do with it. So the practice that has helped me, and I've seen help a number of business owners, is and again, it depends on the business and whatever that looks like, but essentially taking a portion of the cash flows that you're generating and setting that portion aside just for you, just a slush fund so that you can live your life right now and not have to, wait till later. And I think if you can build your business in a way that you can regularly, that you set it on a schedule to take that out, it's just a W-2 employee saving their money, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
them automatically depositing into their 401k. It's you as a business owner automatically depositing into your own bank account in a way that you can do it today. Is, for me, that has had an unreasonable effect, like unreasonable, doesn't make sense effect on my happiness, right? Because those things are not bringing me happiness, but it's taken away that feeling of I'm always having to squeeze the most out of the juice, right? I'm always having to get the maximum out of everything. And I think when business owners are so worried about the health of their business, so worried about maximizing everything that they get, it creates a stress that you can't even truly acknowledge, that you can't even truly get exactly where all of that stress is coming from. But by giving yourself a little bit of freedom has been a game changer from that perspective, because it allows you to honestly, in some ways, just take life and take it a little bit less seriously.
This is timely advice, Curtis. Personally, I am the former in your story of just constantly putting everything back in the business or keeping everything there, and just I'm not really caring for myself in the sense of taking stuff out for leisure or for putting money aside into a different bucket to go overseas or do anything like that. And it's been tough times, so it's just been keeping everything there, maximizing everything, squeezing everything. So
And I
it's
think,
yep.
yeah, I was gonna say, this seems, well, yeah, if you're, well, I may not be able to do that or whatever that looks like. But I think it's not about the dollar amount. It's about creating the habit of doing it on a regular basis. So even if it's $100 here and there, over time, those little things, it goes back to an identity shift, right? Of, if you're the one, and I've been in jobs where that job was extremely stressful, it's because I took on the identity of that job, and anything outside of that was just not accepted by me, and I had to push and push. But by setting money aside, you're giving a vote for the identity of you as someone who can have fun. So even if it's $100 and you just go to the movies and do something stupid with it, like, it's giving you that freedom to spend. And so it's changing of your identity a little bit, because I think so many times with business, and this is the way I am, I get obsessed about things. That's especially what you with entrepreneurs, is they get obsessed and they get all in. They just get head down. They forget about everything else. And that's when you see the business start to struggle a lot of times too, is because you become so focused that other stuff starts to fall away. And then when other stuff falls away, that starts to impact the business, right? Because you can't do your best thinking when your life is falling apart in all these other areas. And so I'm really giving that and talking about that from the perspective of everything is connected. And so by giving yourself that freedom in your personal life, I think ultimately your business is going to be better off too, because it will force you sometimes to make different decisions, but it will also, that recharging, and whatever that recharging is for you, you'll come back fresher to the business. And when we're fresh, our decision quality improves. And that's something that can't be measured, but I've seen the difference, one for me, but I've seen the difference in people's faces when they realize that, okay, I'm bringing in this amount of cash and I can pull out, say, 10%, and I can pull out 10% and I can use it for whatever I want. And just knowing that and having that peace of mind that 10% is always going to go to me is something that impacts you in a way that you can't even really understand. And it just creates a relaxation, a lightness. It just creates a different demeanor oftentimes. And so for me, that was something that has honestly been game-changing personally, and then I've kind of implemented that with different clients and seen that impact them as well.
That's definitely advice I need to take. And I'm sure there's a lot of business owners out there that need to take on this advice as well. I'm sure we're not the only ones who have started off on that journey of just honing in and giving
Yeah.
110% and not taking anything for ourselves. So
Yeah. I would say I'm giving that advice because a lot of times you give the advice you need yourself, right? And so I have been there and am still find myself there certain days. And it's like a reminder. I have to remind myself if I need to do these things. So,
yeah, absolutely. Personally, I found that when I started to understand business finances more, it started to impact the way that I saw personal finance. And I wanted to get your opinion on how different is it managing personal finance from handling a business's finances? Are we talking, in your opinion, is it like different planets or is it all the same at the end of the day?
yeah, I think this is if you look at it at its base level, it's be very similar, right? The issue and the big difference with businesses is there are a lot more moving parts. And the biggest difference is from the complexity of cash flows, right? Because from personal, it's just money going out. But in whatever that income is, it's that. But I think because I'm fairly new in my business owner journey, just in the last few years, but I've seen with these business owners, running a business changes the way you think about your money, where money starts to have a different value in of itself. And I think it actually goes back to that last question, is business owners struggle with what is like I think you inherently start thinking and what's the return on this money that I can get. And so I think that also then facilitates that thinking in personal finances as well. I think that's why you see so many business owners getting into more businesses, getting into real estate, getting into all that, is because it forces you to think about money less as something that you spend and something that goes out, but as a potential investment into something else. And again, they're very, very similar. And I don't think that you have to be a business owner or understand business finances to grasp that concept. But I think with business finances, it's always about essentially the return on your asset, the return on your investment. And I think that that's where the biggest difference and mindset difference and all that comes in. And definitely is something that I think everyone could benefit from, is if they thought about their money in that way. How would that change the way they approached their life? How would that change the way they went about their business on a day-to-day basis?
I was going through your website and as I was doing some research, and I came across the term fractional CFO. And it's the first time I came across anything like that. If you can help explain it to us, what the hell is a fractional CFO? And why should a company hire one?
Yeah, honestly, I'm immersed in the world, so I often don't think about that, but it's interesting how few people have heard the term fractional CFO and what that looks like. And honestly, how few people understand what a CFO actually does, and even a CFO at a company, right? A CFO, from a high level perspective, you have multiple hats that go on within an accounting or finance department within a business. Your accounting or your bookkeeper or your controller, accounting manager, all of those sort of things, those people are looking at transactions and they're looking at financial statements. They're looking backwards. They're looking at past results. Where the CFO comes in is the CFO is focused on looking forward and the strategic vision of the company. And so it's understanding and managing that cash flow. It's forecasting and trying to understand the strategic direction of the business, and then how the finances relate to that how finances relate to the strategic vision that the company has and what the impacts, what all that looks like. And so from a high level, that's what a CFO is. And so if you just take that as fractional CFO, I'm helping businesses that can't yet afford a CFO because they're not big enough, not profitable enough, whatever it looks like. They can't afford a full-time CFO. So by being a fractional CFO, I'm providing that forward-looking guidance, that forward-looking casting, that forward-looking projections on a part-time basis for that client until they grow up. Hopefully, the goal is, right, they continue to grow as a business to where they can bring in a full-time CFO that will then take that and run with it. So what is typically businesses say it depends on the complexity of the business, but say 1 to 20, 30, even 50 million in revenue could be a fractional CFO. Again, depends on the complexity of the business, at what point and at what level you need a CFO. But I'm filling that gap as a fractional CFO before they get to needing a full-time CFO. So I don't do the day-to-day stuff. I do the big picture stuff. I look at their financial statements and I try and help them turn those into a decision-making tool and then come up with a plan for looking forward and try and then model and help them understand what their decisions and how those decisions will impact their future financial health as a business.
I love that idea. I love where people offer services bridging the gap as people are expanding. It's like when they're growing from something small, like a beginning 1-person thing to a 10-person thing, and what you need to get there, you can't always just afford like a $4,000 retainer for a PR. So there's middle services, or in terms of your case, you're going from $1 million to $5 million turnover, and you're starting to understand the complexities, and you're needing help, but then you can't afford a full-time CFO at 6 figures a year, whatever the case may be. And so these services like yours comes in, and it's okay, I can help hold your hand and understand it a bit better until when you're ready, you can, let's jump the gun.
And like you think about it, like also small businesses in general do not have people that they can go to and talk about their big picture ideas. A lot of times you're on an island in that. And so I also provide that's something is coming in and being able to bring my experience to the table and giving them someone to bounce some of those ideas off of, and then taking their ideas and turning that into a forecast or projection and helping them see. And actually, and that's the thing, entrepreneurs, business owners, they always have ideas, right? And so then being able to see if we've got 3 ideas that we're trying to figure out, what idea is going to be the right choice going forward. And honestly, like I'm lucky to get to do this. And I look at it and I'm like, I took all the parts that I liked of the CFO job, of the strategic big picture thinking. and then now that's what I get to do every day with all the clients. And it's like, hey, I couldn't ask for anything better than that, right?
And I think there's a key point there. Bouncing ideas is one thing with other entrepreneurs, other business owners, but bouncing ideas with someone who understands your numbers, I think, is another key point, because then the decisions or the ideas that they can come up with to help you is aligned with, like you said, your vision, but also aligned with the context and understanding of your current business pulse as well.
Yeah. And it's like, you can talk strategically high picture with other business owners that don't know your business, but you can do that with me. And then I can take that to a tactical level to where then we could create a plan based off of that. And they're never going to be there for that because they're overrunning their business. They're not running yours. So yeah, I obviously think it's a great service, but I've seen it's something you're really starting to see that also, like fractional CMO, like chief marketing. There's a lot of it's becoming more common language in a more common position. And I think it's something that a lot of businesses potentially need. And it's about getting the word out there and letting them know that, hey, we're out here. So if you want it, come get it.
Yeah. So here's the layup, Curtis. So what's it called? What's the fractional CFO service called?
Yeah, my CFO service is called Bison CFO. So it's bisoncfo.com. If you want to check it out, go check it out there. We'd love to talk to you. But yeah, so and then I have my Social media, you can always, I think you've found me from my newsletter. I always like to share insights with people from my newsletters. Would encourage you, if you're trying to learn, just go there. Hopefully I can teach you a thing or two. But yeah.
Absolutely. I'll put all those links in the show notes for people so they can find your website and subscribe to your newsletter. Highly recommended. We're going to take a bit of a hard left.
Let's go.
Where do you see the world of finance and business heading in the next decade, especially with technological advancements like AI and maybe even blockchain?
Yeah. It's an interesting thing because the specifically accounting and finance world from a college perspective is one of the hardest hit areas of you have less and less students going into accounting, going into these classes, these degrees, because of a fear of what AI is going to do to the profession. And I'm not wizard enough to know. I think the impact on business in general is going to be a huge range of outcomes depending on the type of business and all of that. So I don't know enough to speak specifically to different businesses, but for any business that has a finance function, I think you're going to start to see AI assisted accounting becoming the way. And I think you're not going to get accounting is not going to go away. Finance is not going to go away in a business because there will always be people and things that need to touch it. But I think you're going to see faster reporting. I think you're going to see less need for as much financial staff. And I think you're going to see, in general, like a fundamentally different interaction with finance and accounting from the business as a whole. I think we're already seeing it with a lot of AI getting integrated into some new kind of solutions where it's automatically helping you code transactions. It's automatically doing all these different things. So I don't know that I can give an exact outcome because there's a lot of stuff that could happen, but I think it is going to be fundamentally different. I think what you're going to end up with is you're going to end up with less people processing data and more people doing high-level financial analysis and manipulation. So what that looks like is instead of having 3 data entry clerks and maybe a supervisor, you're going to have a higher-end person that maybe has one person overseas, because you also take in the ability to hire globally now. And you take in and you have one person processing all the data that AI touches. And then you have someone that analyzes and really gets that data into a format that the business can use. So I think it's exciting. I think people have a tendency to be scared, but the only reason you should be scared is if you're not improving and working on your skills. I think if you're working on your skills, then you're going to come out ahead because it's going to make you better at your job. From a blockchain perspective, I think blockchain is interesting. I'm a big believer in I'm a big believer in the Bitcoins and some of this blockchain technology, but I don't have a good sense of how it will remake industry at this point. From an accounting perspective, people have talked about it being used as a source of truth for data and for information. I don't, honestly, without going into details, I don't see a need for that. I think it's a little bit overblown. It's a little bit too much. Most applications don't need that. But in an auditing world, in a contract world, in some of these worlds, there's absolutely a ton of solutions. The issue is getting people over to that technology. And I think we're over 10 years into the technology now, and we've yet to get to that point. So I'm hesitant to make any predictions of what's going to happen because I think we've seen how difficult it is for new technology to come in, especially when it's not easily implementable. AI is easily implementable, right? you can pretty easily bring it into your business. Blockchain, it seems, has been a lot harder to do. And so I honestly don't know where it's going to pop up, but I feel like we are going to see some of those applications.
Mm. I do think we're up for some really interesting times over the
Yeah.
next decade. Everything is maturing so fast. The AI is moving at ballistic speeds.
It is.
I'm excited though, in terms of, like you said, I think there'll be a lot less human labor in terms of basic data entry and basic reporting and stuff like that, which is great. I think it then gives us the time to upskill, develop, and focus on the higher level strategic ideas that we should be spending our time on.
Like
Yeah.
even, I would say, I want to dive into the AI from an accounting perspective. I've not gotten as deep as I would have liked, but you think about the perspective of you link in all of these sources, and now instead of you ever having to supply a receipt, all of that information, all of that backup is all there based off of the ability of AI to process the data coming in from the other sources, based off of integrations and APIs to attach everything and then assess everything from all of these different directions. And it's really exciting from a perspective of, like, I started using a new personal finance app, and they've integrated AI into this app. And so I just typed in, what restaurant have I been to the most in the last 12 months? And it just pulls that information in and ranked them from 1 to 10 or whatever. And honestly, I was a little bit embarrassed by what the result was, right? I don't like, it's like, I don't know that I wanted to know that I spent that much, but it's fascinating from the perspective of the ability to get to data and to get to good data is going to be a lot easier. And it's the people that learn how to interact with that and work with that that are going to get the advantage from that. And then there's going to be a lot of people that really struggle with that because they get distracted. They don't focus on the right things. They allow it to become noise instead of becoming action. And it'll be interesting. I think that's something that I've planned to explore, is figuring out ways to help businesses with their financial data in that way, to help them just have a different way to interact with their data. And I think it's going to be really powerful when it gets here, but I think it's going to take a little bit longer than we think, but I think it's crazy how quickly it has moved, for sure.
Mhm. What's the personal finance app called?
It's called Monarch Money, I believe. Yeah, monarchmoney.com. I've always used You Need a Budget. I don't know if you're familiar with that, and I've always enjoyed that. But my bank, for whatever reason, won't sync well with it. I always liked that I had to touch everything in You Need a Budget. And so I tested out a few apps and I found Monarch, and I've just started it, so I can't exactly endorse it all the way, but it seems really cool. And their little AI engine is pretty simple at this point, but it's pretty cool that you can ask questions and it'll pull those transactions and give you reports. It's pretty neat.
Cool. Moving on, I just want to talk about the current economy of business at the moment for a second. I'm not sure what it's like where you are, but here in Australia, I've seen a lot of businesses tank. It's pretty brutal out there at the moment. In your perspective, you're working closely with a lot of businesses. What's the one thing you think businesses often overlook that bites them in the rear later?
Yeah, I think it is brutal. Like, I've seen a number of businesses that have struggled. It's interesting because you look at there's all the signs that things should be really negative, but then there's still a lot of success, a lot of things going on that are good. And so it's hard to actually parcel out what is heads, what is tails, what's coming. And I don't honestly, I'm not sure I have a clue what's coming. I don't try and make bets on that. But I think there was I should have pulled up what this study was, but there was a study that was done, and it looked at, I think it was Harvard Business Review did this study. And in this study, Harvard Business Review looked at the different elements that made an enduring or a business that did well through those difficult times. And when you looked at the difference wasn't huge, right? It was just small things. But when you came to the difference between the well-performing, the poor-performing, and the ones in between, the good-performing ones were the ones who took both offensive and defensive actions. The poor-performing ones were typically the ones that acted extremely defensively. And so I think, especially when business is tough, when things are brutal, it's our immediate response to look at what expenses can I cut? What things can I do? But often we say, again, using my sales call example, but, oh, sales are going bad, so I'm just not going to do sales calls. If you don't do sales calls, then you're not going to have success. But if your goal was 10 sales calls a day, and maybe now your goal needs to be 20 sales calls a day, right? And so it's thinking of it, I like the way they put it from an offensive and defensive standpoint, is what offensive actions are you taking and what defensive actions are you taking? So let's not just focus on the defensive, which tends to be common, and let's focus on both sides of that coin. And those companies that did that came out well above the average returns, average growth of a business during a time of difficulty. And so when I think about, that's what I think about a lot, is think about it from a terms of what are my for every defensive action I take, what's an offensive action I can take that I can be proactive in doing something else? Because the reality is, every time the economy goes down, every time there's a recession, every time there's difficulty, there are businesses that break out and have breakout successes and breakout growth during that period. And so while your goal may not be breakout growth, your goal just may be not to lose the business. I think thinking with that offensive mindset can help you think of things that other people in the industry may not think of and give you an advantage that can allow you to have a higher chance of success during those times. And I think also, I'll just add real quickly, of businesses tend to, or small businesses especially, tend to worry too much about what's going on with the economy, when in reality, if they just keep doing what they should do day in and day out, their business may not do as well as they'd hoped. Their business may even shrink. But if they're really focused during that period, they can have more success than other people around them, which is ultimately the best you can do sometimes. And so I think while it's smart to know and consider what's going on around you, it's also, we want to, if you're hyper focusing on it, I can almost guarantee that you're going to struggle, right? Because you're hyper focused on it. And I'd say instead, let's get our focus off of the economy and let's get our focus to the business. And I think thinking of it in terms of offensive and defensive helps you, when you're thinking offensively, helps you think about your business and think about it in a way that you can move forward instead of just looking to maintain.
I think that's a great point that you've shared. I don't think a lot of us think along those lines because, as you said, when times get tough, we tend to contract and tighten up and cut costs. Very rarely do we think about going on the offense because we get in that scarcity mindset of thinking, oh, we're going to save the resources for later, or we don't know what's coming, so maybe we shouldn't be splurging on this or trying this out or experimenting with this. But I think at the end of the day, sorry, you go.
I was going to say, and let me say, I'm not saying don't do the defensive things. I'm saying instead of spending 100% of your time on the defensive things, spend 20 to 30% and then spend the other 70, 80% on offensive. So you still got to spend time on both. It's when we get in that defensive mindset. And I think the Harvard Business Review study, I can provide that link. I know I have it saved.
Yep.
That to me was really eye-opening because it just highlighted that focusing on the one is ultimately going to potentially hurt you and hurt your chances for success.
Yeah. I have a personal story that ties into this. When COVID came about and we had a small cafe space in Darlinghurst, and the decision at the time was to rebrand it. And it was smack bang during COVID. And everyone was thinking, oh man, are you guys sure you guys want to be reinvesting everything and renovating the whole shop and changing the name and all that stuff? Even I was hesitant, but when we went through with it and got it done, possibly it was the timing when people got a bit out of lockdown or was able to spend a bit again. Everyone was so happy and they were looking for places to go to and spend. And the concept that we had done, we absolutely blew it up. We were more than 3-4x what we were doing previously before that, during the time where everyone was worried about what was happening and tightening up. We shut the shop, renovated, and went the other direction and doubled down on it. Very risky, but it turned out all right for us.
And because it was successful doesn't make it a good or bad decision. I think we could go into a whole thing with that too. But I think what's interesting is, because we don't want to say, oh, well, because that, like, oh, it's going to work anytime you do that. So that's why I say that is, like, it may have been a good decision. It may have been a bad decision. But what's interesting about that is you made that decision out of faith. You couldn't have predicted probably that people were going to react that way coming out of lockdown. And so it was successful, but even if you had tried to predict that success, you wouldn't have got right why it was successful. But people coming out, that being a contributing factor, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with our assumptions, is we consume a lot of things. And so talking through that and doing that, it's like, oh, that's really interesting, because it does highlight it was just the fact that you were being offensive gave you an advantage, even though you may have had the wrong assumption about that offensive action. Because you were being offensive, you ended up still being successful, even if it was for a different reason than maybe you even suspected.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kurtis, you've got a newsletter and a podcast where you talk about frameworks and financial concepts. What's the Kurtis Hanni special? What can people get from you that they won't get from anywhere else?
Yeah. I think what is unique about me is I did not go the traditional financial route, in that I did not go to public accounting. I did not, go the traditional CPA route, did not do all of that stuff. And instead, within 3 years of starting my career, I immediately went into small businesses, and for the last over 15 years now have worked side by side with business owners. Up until the last 2 years, that side by side was as their CFO, as their financial person. And so I've seen, without being the business owner, I've seen all of the phases, from starting businesses to being a part of mergers and acquisitions, to all stages of that. And then you bring alongside that, for some reason, I've always enjoyed writing. Even when it was just personal stuff, I was always writing. And you bring together those two skills. And I think there's very few people that have that experience in small business as a CFO for 10 plus years and able to write. And what I've been told consistently, and I'm not claiming this because sometimes it still feels like I'm shooting in the dark and hoping something works, right? But what I've been told by people is that I do a great job of simplifying those complex concepts and make them more attainable for people in ways that they weren't before. And I've heard that consistently enough that I can feel reasonably confident that if you subscribe, you'll get a little nugget in there that helps you view one of those concepts in a way you hadn't understood it before. And that's what I enjoy, because the reality is, as a CFO in a small business, you're really partnering with that business owner. And so I've gotten to see those insights. I've gotten to be side by side with them for years. So now having the newsletter has just allowed me to do that more at scale and get more opportunities for those conversations. And so honestly, when I started it, I wasn't sure what to expect. I've had way more success with it than I could have ever expected to have. And so I feel blessed that I get to do that. And 100% it's made me better at my job because it's forced me to think about things in a way that when you break stuff down to as simple as components, I think it's only then that you truly understand it. So I think after 15 years, I can say I'm finally understanding finances in maybe ways I didn't understand them before.
Kurtis, you deserve all the success with that newsletter. The way that you write, you really do simplify complex ideas. You make it readable, it's easily digestible. I love the format, and I've learned so much from it. So I highly recommend others check it out too. Thank you for the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah.
Okay, last one, buddy. Give me your hottest, most controversial finance take that you believe 100%, but it makes people lose their minds.
I thought about this one because I have some, I don't know about losing minds, but the one that I've gotten the most pushback on social media, on these other places, is actually around books. But I think it falls into the finance topic because of this. And the two books that I absolutely despise that a lot of people love are Rich Dad, Poor Dad and Think and Grow Rich. Both of those books I cannot stand for different reasons for each of them. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I could go way deep on this, but I will say that some of the concepts do have a certain amount of value in that people have read those books. It has changed the way they think about money and changed the way they approach their career. I will acknowledge that. But as an accountant and as someone in finance, I cannot get over the fact that he relabels a house as a liability, that he relabels the way we think about these things, and that ultimately, when it comes down to it, the premise of the book is not true. It can be dangerous if it's not understood completely because of the level of leverage, the way that it's been used by a number of people can ultimately lead to bankruptcy. And I think it's a super oversimplification. And I'd say if you just look at his history, borderline fraudulent book. And so it's funny. I don't know if you noticed this when you subscribe to my newsletter, but I ask in my opening welcome email, what is people's favorite book? And I feel like I'm getting taunted for asking that question because the most responded answer is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. No lie, the most responded answer is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And so I have to, as I go through those welcome email responses, I have to put up with that every single week. And I'd say that's my hottest take and the one that I've gotten the most pushback on when I've talked about it on social media.
Fair enough. That's a good one. Buddy, we're ready to wrap up. Was there anything that we left out or anything you wanted to share that we didn't get a chance to touch on today?
No, I would just say I appreciate getting to come on. I had a fun conversation. I would just challenge everyone. There's no shame in saying you don't understand financial statements. You don't understand your numbers. There's no shame in getting help in that. The best way to get good at it is to get reps and to find good sources to learn from. So I just encourage you to do that. And that's my whole goal, is just to remove some of the stigma around that. So I appreciate the opportunity to come on and get to talk about it a little bit.
Thank you so much, Kurtis, for your time. I really do appreciate it. There was so much to learn from this conversation, and I'm really glad that we were able to connect. I hope to further connect and learn from you in the future. I'll be following you closely on your newsletter. And until then, thank you very much.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the show. All the links to the show notes will be available at kevinleesocial.com, spelled KEVINLY. Conversely, if you have any interviews that you'd love to recommend, please send it over to kevinleesocial@gmail.com. I'd love to connect. Thank you. Until the next episode.